good evening, everyone, and welcome to COS at Home. I am your host, Jonathan Viod, and thank you so much for joining us for another exciting program. Tonight, we've got a great show in store for you where we'll be debuting our Mailbag segment, and we'll even possibly have a contest regarding the Mailbag segment. We're also going to be sharing another tool that you can utilize from the comfort of your own home to take action and make a meaningful contribution to Convention of States, and much more. I was going to go through the entire show, but you know what? I'll let some of that simmer there for you. We're also going to be celebrating a wonderful, really exciting anniversary later on in the program as well. So be sure to stick around for that. And of course, for our interview portion of the program, we will be joined by one of our great endorsers, the esteemed congressman from the Lone Star State, Congressman Chip Roy. The congressman will be joining us in just a few minutes, and we'll also answer questions from you. So make sure you are ready with your questions. But before we get to all of that, as is usual with COS at Home, we would like to welcome any of you who are new to the show or new to the organization. We're so happy that you're with us. And just to describe what we're all about with Convention of States, we are a grassroots movement focused on the goal of utilizing Article 5 of the Constitution to call a Convention of States in order to propose amendments to the Constitution that would reduce the size and scope of the federal government, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, and place term limits on all members of Congress and federal officials. In order for us to hold such a convention, we need 34 states to pass our resolution, and to date, 19 states have done so. So if you're keeping score at home, we only need 15 states to now pass the resolution in order for us to call that convention. So we're really excited about this, and it's a great time for you to be getting involved because we're over halfway there. Of course, if you're new, and even if you've been around for a while, you may be wondering, well, what exactly is the story behind Article 5 getting into the Constitution? Well, I'm glad that you asked, because we have Mark Meckler and Rick Green sitting down inside Independence Hall ready to give you the answer.
Imagine you were in this room. We're in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the very place where the Constitution was done and the Declaration of Independence. I'm Rick Green, America's Constitution coach, here with Mark Meckler. And Mark, if you had been in this room when it happened, when the Constitution was created, and George Mason stands up at the very end to say, hey guys, wait a minute, we messed up, we got a real problem here, what would you do?
I'd have probably been irritated. Sit down,
you can hear the
George.
grumbling, right?
They're
like let's go home.
Man, it's 2 days. September 15, 1787, 2 days before the end of convention. You guys have heard the story. It's hot in here.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't have HVAC back then, so it's hot. The windows are boarded up. They're all irritated by now. They want to go home. Mason stands to address the men, and he says, we have a terrible problem with the document we've drafted.
I can hear the groans now.
Yeah, everybody's like, oh,
Here
George again, right?
Yeah.
And he says, we've given the power to the federal government to propose amendments should they deem them necessary, but we've not given the same power to the people acting through the states.
Now I got to stop you there. Back up. They've been here for all those weeks to create a federal government. They've redesigned the whole thing. The Constitution is designed. Here's our 3 branches of government. Here's what states can do. Here's what federal government can do. They created all of that. And he's saying, wait a minute, we have a problem.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of lost history in there. Actually, the very first draft that went out to the working committees contained this power. The states had the power.
I didn't know that.
The federal government didn't, actually. And when it came back, somehow it had been reversed. And so he notices this at the last minute, literally brings this problem up. Everybody groans. We think we don't have the videotape, right? Yeah. But then he asks a question that I think is the real question, and this question resonates across the ages. He says, are we so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will ever propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny?
Now wait, let me put that in country boy language. I'm a country boy. That means if the federal government ever gets out of control, do we really think the very people that stole power, that took it without permission, will just give it back? We'll just hand it off to us?
You know, whenever I tell this story in a hall or in a meeting somewhere, people laugh.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what they did. You know, we don't have a recording. We can kind of tell. Madison's notes, in that point, they say nin com. It's Latin for no comment, essentially. That's an abbreviation. No debate. These guys debated everything.
That's the 1787 version of mic drop.
Exactly.
Right? No,
like, I call it the forehead slap. Like, everybody just went, oh my gosh.
How did we miss that?
I can't believe we missed that.
Yeah.
And so Eldridge Gary proposes the second part of Article 5 gives the states 2/3 of them the power to call and convene a convention of states for proposing amendments. Then the vote's taken. I think this part's incredible. Imagine them in this room, right? Ready to go home. It's unanimous.
Unanimous.
Absolutely. So it was so obvious to them that we had to give this power to the people acting through the states, that there's no debate, and it's unanimously adopted.
Now let's just summarize that real quick. So they created the Constitution, they created the 3 branches of government, they created all these different levels of accountability, and they said, we didn't solve everything. In the future there will be issues, this will need to be amended. Congress can propose amendments and send it back to the states, and they ratify it. And what George Mason changed, what they actually put in there at the end is the states can propose amendments. The states come together and propose amendments, and then it goes back to all the states to be ratified. And unanimously, they said, that's a good idea. We need that second mechanism.
Yeah, and important to remember what that means is they gave the ultimate power not to the federal government, not to Washington, D.C., but to the people in the states.
Thank you, George Mason.
What an amazing, amazing story to think that they debated all of those different things. And when it came to Article 5, that second clause, there was no debate. It was a unanimous decision to add that aspect to the Constitution, to give you and I, we the people, the opportunity and the responsibility to be able to amend the Constitution without having to go through the federal government. Just amazing. And I'll also point out, if you've never had the opportunity to be in Philadelphia and visit Independence Hall, you got to do it. I really, really highly recommend it. Just an amazing experience to be inside that room. Okay, so now let's hear about the most recent legislative update. Where are we at with Convention of States? Well, we've got a special one for you from our Senior Vice President of Legislative Affairs, Rita Peters.
Hey, Jonathan, and hello to all of you COS at Home viewers. I'm Rita Peters, and I serve as Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs with Convention of States Action. I just wanted to give you a brief legislative update on our state team's progress so far this year. So far, our resolution has been introduced or carried over in 19 states. We've had 1 subcommittee win in Iowa and 3 committee wins in Iowa, Massachusetts, and Idaho. That committee win in Idaho made history. It was the first time we've ever passed committee in that state, and we're still pending there, hoping we can get the support we need in the Senate for a successful Senate floor vote. We're also still pending in Iowa for a vote by the Iowa House. We're praying that those Iowa representatives will have the courage to vote yes and add Iowa to the list of states ready to do their part to save our republic. Our resolution is also pending in the North Carolina Senate, having already passed the House last year. So we're hoping that when the North Carolina Senate convenes, those senators will take their stand against federal overreach by pushing our resolution across the finish line. Now, keep in mind that the 19 states that have already passed our application are still hard at work too. They're working on 34 ready legislation to put in place procedures and safeguards for the delegation they'll send when we get to convention, as well as legislation that enhances federalism, freedom, and fundamental rights. That's just a quick snapshot for you. Enjoy the rest of the program and keep up the good fight.
Well, thank you so much, Rita, and that was a great update, and it gives you a real good understanding of where we are with our movement right now. And again, if you're new, this is a great time to be involved because we're doing everything we can, and we're having states across the country help out in our movements in Iowa and Idaho, so we're so glad to have you. And I'm glad that Rita also mentioned some of the other things that have been going on in other states. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on in this program when we're answering the mailbag question. But now, without further ado, I want to bring on our guest for this evening. Again, the esteemed congressman from the Lone Star State, none other than Congressman Chip Roy. Congressman Roy, how are you doing this evening?
Well, I'd be better if I were in Texas, but I'm in the swamp, which is the irony of my existence, that I took a job requiring me to come to the swamp. But that's where I am. But happy to be on with you guys. It's been a little overdue. I got blown up, I think, 3 or 4 times by votes, and I apologize for that.
That's quite all right, sir. We're so glad to have you. And, you know, God bless you for your willingness to go down there into the swamp all the time, to leave the great state of Texas and have to be there in Washington, D.C. But we need freedom fighters like you. And I just wanted to first say thank you so much for your willingness to do that.
It's an honor. I mean, I represent the best district in the best state in the best country in the history of the world. So it's a good spot to be, and proud to have Rick Green there, outside of Fredericksburg, and the great new campus there, which is fantastic. And, been longtime partners with Mark and what you guys have been doing with COS now going back for years. And, I guess now we're going to have to re-up it in Texas and, make sure that we keep finishing the job to move it forward. But, we kind of been sitting in and around 20 for a while. We need a good year or two to get that number getting closer to 30 than 20.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, and that's a great place for us to start. We just had Rita Peters on to give us an update, and one of the things that I appreciate the most about you as a public servant and as a legislator and a leader in our country is your willingness to speak the truth and do so boldly and courageously. Currently, we have the COS resolution. It's being considered in Iowa and Idaho, as Rita was mentioning. And to be frank, many legislators there are being swayed by our opposition, who are peddling lies and stoking fear, generating fear to try and prevent them from passing this important resolution to give us the opportunity to really solve the problems that our country is facing. So I just wanted to ask you, how would you address some of the legislators who are currently mulling this over and considering whether or not to pass this Article 5 convention resolution?
Well, the argument that was always used when I was advocating for this in Texas and then generally across the country when I was at the Texas Public Policy Foundation and we were trying to advance COS broadly is, as you know, and as most of the listeners are going to know, right? It's the runaway convention. It's the, look, we're going to end up with things that we don't want to. Why would we open up the Constitution? They're going to go after our guns. They're going to do some version of the Equal Rights Amendment. They're going to do blah, 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 right? The list of the parade of horribles, right? And the argument to me is really simple, right? Let me fast forward to the final argument. If whatever we would agree to, if whatever occurred in the Convention of States were to be so bad that we can't stop it with 13 states to reject it when it comes to the adoption of needing to get to the 3/4 of the states, well, then we're done anyway. Like, if you don't have 13 states that can defend our Second Amendment rights, or 13 states that will hold the line on whatever they would want to radically do to the 14th Amendment, or whatever it is, make it up, then you're in trouble anyway. The second thing that I would say is I generally believe that what you put forward in these things, they're going to be self-regulating anyway. There's going to be kind of a nature of things where people are going to, go through the list of whatever it is. And obviously the COS project has been very specific in trying to get the language and having these 3 categories of things to limit the nature of the amendments and what that would look like. And I think they'll be kind of self-limiting anyway, because you got to get some agreement, and you got to get agreement, and you got to get it through 3/4 of the states. So at the end of the day, we're talking about term limits and balancing the budget and limiting the power of the federal government. I mean, you're going to be in that zip code. And if people start running afoul of that, well, I think it'll take care of itself. And here's my final point. You remember that scene in Christmas Vacation when Chevy Chase is sitting there and he just flipped out, right? The dog went through and made a mess, and the tree caught fire, and it's all a disaster. And, Ellen says, I think everybody needs to go before it gets worse. And Clark says, worse? How can it get any worse? And to some degree, I feel that way. $34.4 trillion of debt and a massive federal government interfering with our way of life, totally stomping on our ability to live freely, killing energy freedom, killing healthcare freedom. I can go down the list. I feel like the power of the people, as the founders, as Rick and Mark articulated from Independence Hall, the power of the people to be able to say, whoa, we got to reclaim that. I think that is more powerful than expecting these bozos in Washington to do it anytime soon.
I completely agree. And, part of the beauty of Article 5 is that it puts we the people in control. And I think what we're trying to accomplish with Convention of States, we have a saying, and it's on our buttons, is we're more than a convention, right? We're not just trying to get to convention and propose those amendments. We're trying to rebuild a culture of self-governance. And ultimately, I've even said to people, if we got to convention and we had everything that we could possibly want added to the Constitution, would it change a lot? And yes, it would change some things. But if we, the people, aren't ready to kind of dig in and reassert ourselves in this system of government and make sure that we're doing everything we can to hold our leaders, our elected officials accountable, then we're not going to see any type of change, even if we do have those amendments. So to me, the beauty of what we're trying to accomplish with Convention of States is that we're trying to bring people and educate people in their role in our government and get them to reassert themselves and better understand their role as self-governing citizens.
Yeah, and I think that's a critically important part of all of this. I mean, take the three categories in the COS project. You've got, I would argue the most important one is the balanced budget amendment or some variation thereof, a spending restraint amendment, because we can't do it. I'm just telling you. I mean, I've thrown everything I've got at trying to force spending restraint. And just today, just a mere, 4.5 hours ago, my Republican colleagues voted, I think, 132 to 83 in favor of the first half of this omnibus spending bill that spends at a level higher than the Nancy Pelosi omnibus spending bill of fiscal year 23. This after 6 months of continuing resolutions and kicking the can down the road. I can go into the weeds of all that if you want me to. My main point is we're $34.4 trillion in debt. We're racking up $1 trillion of debt every 100 days. We now have more interest than defense spending. And in 2 years, we'll crack $1 trillion of interest. We are killing ourselves with borrowed money and spending. And I don't even mean the debt and the borrowing and the undermining of our currency. We're killing our own freedom. We're borrowing all that money, spending money we don't have to fund the tyrants and the bureaucrats that are undermining our freedom, regulating us to death. And by the way, I would remind those watching this, the Texans anyway, that are on this, that today is March 6th. That should mean something to Texans, right? It was the 13th day of the siege at the Alamo. And today is the day that those almost 200 men died fighting for Texas and for independence. And, what did they? I just gave a floor speech with my friend Scott Perry, the former chairman of the Freedom Caucus. That what did they die for? What did the boys of Bastogne die? They didn't die for us to have $12.7 billion of earmarks in a spending bill this year. So back to Convention of States. Look, I'm going to keep throwing my body in front of the train here. I'm going to keep trying to blow it up. I'm going to call out Republicans and Democrats. I don't care. It's the uniparty. It's all the same stuff. Republicans are better than Democrats, but Republicans are still just Democrat light. So until we're willing to actually grab the mantle and do something meaningful, nothing's going to change. I think at Convention of States, I can promise you this. If Congress is hearing the footsteps of 29, 30, 31, 32 states, obviously get to 34, Congress will be more inclined to do something.
Amen. Amen. Speaking of the uniparty and everything, there are a lot of things that I'd love to talk with you about tonight, and I know we've only got so much time, but I think it's important that before we talk about what's in the news cycle right now, that we do something that the media rarely does, which is kind of look back and actually reflect on something that happened that wasn't actually all that long ago, although in news cycles, it seems like forever ago. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what took place with the speaker's vacating of the speaker's chair a couple of months ago. So if you don't mind, could you just kind of set the scene for us? Let us know what led to that. Why did we get to that point? Where you stood on it? And then tell us how do you think things have worked out since that time?
Okay. Well, there's a lot there. I'm going to try to give you the 3-minute-ish version, and then we can dive into more questions if you want, because there's a lot in that. Rewind the clock 14 and a half months ago, right? January of 23. So we'd come in and we were debating about the rules. We wanted to change the way the place was operating in terms of making sure we could see the bills, making sure we had seats at the table, putting conservatives on committees, conservatives on the rules committee, so we could have a voice. Knowing that we had a 4 or 5 seat majority is very slim. We wanted to find out how could we unite and restore regular order, pass bills, and so forth. Went through the whole debate with McCarthy in January 23, and to Kevin's credit, he put 3 conservatives on the Rules Committee, he added conservatives to the Appropriations Committee, he did almost everything we asked. And then one of the things we'd set was a spending limit, that we would embrace spending reforms at, we said, 1471. Well, without knowing what those numbers are, it would be a significant cut back to pre-COVID spending levels. So fast forward, we did a lot of good things. We passed H.R. 2, strong border security bill, strongest we've ever done. That took a lot of work. I could spend an hour on that. We passed Limit, Save, Grow. First time conservatives had voted for a debt ceiling increase because it was $1.5 trillion debt ceiling increase, but for a whole lot of reforms. The REINS Act, spending restraint, putting in place restrictions, repealing the Inflation Reduction Act, and all the Democrats, all this stuff. So we passed that bill. Okay, great, strong message. Then we did some other stuff, and we were working towards the process. Then we get to May, and the debt ceiling is expiring. And unfortunately, a deal was cut that we thought wasn't good enough. And we blasted it and said, this is not good enough. It did at least have caps in place, but it went too far. It had side deals and all these things. Anyway, too much in the weeds. Fast forward. We started moving appropriations bills in the summer. We were trying to get it done, but there was a distrust because this deal was cut that increased the debt ceiling $4 trillion for basically a spending cap, basically. And we wanted more. So the spending caps were put in place. We worked through the appropriations bill. We got 7 appropriations bills passed and moved to the floor. Moved over to the Senate. We had 3 others that were sent to the floor out of committee. We were working through all that, but we got hung up in September. Didn't have the numbers, didn't have it done. There were some tensions that I'll kind of gloss over. And the bottom line is we got to the end of the rainbow in September. And some of us felt that we should pass a continuing resolution with border security attached, H.R. 2, send it over to the Senate and message it into a shutdown. And we had moderates who were along with us who were going to go along. Some conservatives didn't think that would actually result in an agreement. We ended up not having an agreement. Kevin McCarthy put a continuing resolution on the floor that was basically a clean continuing resolution, in his words, to get in front of what the Senate had passed, which was Ukraine funding, which he was right. They did have a Ukraine bill. And so one of my colleagues filed the vacate motion. It was my friend, Matt Gaetz from Florida. So we then had the debate. Kevin was removed. And then we had 3 weeks of debate over Speaker. I did not support the vacate at that point because Kevin had honored most of the commitments in terms of all of the reforms, what we'd gotten done, moving bills done. We hadn't done that in years. We had conservatives had a voice. We'd gotten a lot of stuff done, but not everything we wanted. I was still optimistic that we could keep dragging and pulling along to get to spending restraint. I knew we weren't going to get everything we wanted. So then fast forward, we went through 3 weeks of speakers debate in October. Obviously, Mike Johnson was selected. You ask how I think things are going. I would tell you that, unfortunately, not that well. Mike's a friend. He's a good man. I'm not going to disparage him, but I'm just going to call the balls and strikes that I think I need to call. I will tell you this, that we have now, I think, at least 5 times under his tenure, passed major spending legislation and an NDAA with many more Democrat votes than Republican votes. And we've done so in ways that violate what we try to do. There's suspension of the rules. So we passed 4, I think, let's see, 1, 2, 3 CR, continuing resolutions. Today's omnibus spending bill, it's half of the omnibus. We'll do another one in a week or two, and which, again, busts the caps and spends more money than we have and doesn't get all the policy riders that we wanted. And then the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which we put all sorts of, that was another one I forgot. We put all sorts of great policies in there to make it less woke, focus on the mission. Most conservative NDAA we've ever passed, ended abortion tourism, ended transgender surgeries. Well, we passed the NDAA, got rid of all those reforms except for a couple, and extended FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, where they have warrantless spying on Americans. So now here we sit. We haven't reformed FISA. We haven't cut spending. We've passed major bills with more Democrat votes than Republican votes. We haven't secured the border, and Ukraine funding is still on the table to be on the floor of the House. That's not where I wanted to be. So today I pushed back on Mike on the floor. I'm going to call balls and strikes. You guys, whoever my constituents are on the screen, didn't send me there for second place. It's like I got to keep calling balls and strikes.
Absolutely. And I appreciate your willingness to do that. And look, Speaker Johnson is a huge supporter of Convention of States. Yeah. He helped us pass in Louisiana. So we're incredibly grateful to him and everything that he has accomplished. Yep. But with that said, as you pointed out, we, the people, are not winning right now, right? We're not winning with what's going on in Washington, D.C. And you mentioned the spending issues, and it feels like almost every week there's an issue or there's a fight over the budget and spending and things of that nature. Unfortunately, the reality is that it's not. Again, we end up losing. We, the people, end up losing no matter how you shake it out with all of these spending and budget battles. So my question for you is, what can we, the people, do to help you and to try to reach out and speak to people like Speaker Johnson, who I do believe is somebody that would respond to us and listen to the people? What can we do to help you?
So, look, I would say if Mike were here, and I hope he sees this footage somehow or that it's communicated back to him. Mike is a good man who was put in a tough spot. I think Mike is reflecting the conference. A conference that is divided, a Republican conference that is divided. We are moving the needle. Roughly half the conference is kind of closer to where we want to be in terms of spending and willingness to fight. It's getting there. It's really not half, but we can drag half there. But there's still a lot of old guard that are still, kind of stuck. And I think what I would tell you that is important to communicate to Mike is at some point there's got to be a willingness to fight. At some point, you have to go all in, right? At some point, you have to say, this is worth fighting for. And I think that Mike, respectfully, has succumbed too much to the excuse machine up here. Well, we only have a 2-vote majority. Yeah, it's hard. But we only had a 5-seat majority last year, and we passed H.R. 2, we passed Limit Save Grow, we passed a conservative NDAA, we passed 7 appropriations bills, we worked our butts off for an entire year. Now we just cut a deal, and we kind of undid a lot of that. I know you got to cut a deal when the Democrats control the Senate, but not a bad deal, a compromise deal that actually does get half of what we want, an actual half a loaf or something close to it. And I guess my point is this, is I've been around longer than I should be, between being Ted's chief of staff and watching this stuff up close and personally, being a member now, where there's always an excuse. If we win the House in November, big if. If Donald Trump wins in November, an if. If the Senate is Republican, still an if. Probably the most likely of those three, or I don't know, maybe not, who knows. We're not going to get 60. You guys know, if you're an astute political follower, that Republicans use that excuse just as much, right? They used it in Donald Trump's first term when they left him stranded. And he kind of made his bed in a couple of those, but they left him stranded on healthcare, on border security, on other spending, on other issues. And my point of all that is they'll say, Chip, just like right now, Mike and everybody else, Chip, we only have a 2-seat majority. We don't have the Senate. We don't have the White House. If I could wave my magic wand, we do all these great conservative things. But we never actually do it. And we get control of those bodies. And then we don't have the Senate. And they say, well, Chip, we don't have 60. We can't do it. The real reason, and I'm filibustering here, let me stop. The real reason there's a problem, this would be the second thing I would ask you to communicate to Mike or anybody else, any of your own, Congress critters, is you got to beat the defense establishment in this town. We're losing right now because too many of our Republicans believe we need more defense spending because China and Russia and all these, we got more defense spending. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but they're stuck on that. They think we need to fund Ukraine, irrespective of border security. They just think we need to fund Ukraine. They think we got to have FISA in full force or we're going to die. And all of those things are controlling the entire argument. Like everything. We can't go cut meaningfully non-defense spending because everybody's going, oh, we're going to die. And it's always the intel. It's like, oh, we can't tell you. We're behind closed doors. Well, you don't understand the threats we have, the terrorist threats. And we go to briefings, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, I know there are threats. But, I still think you should have warrantless search on Americans. Color me crazy. So I just think we need to tell our members, speaker on down, like, you got to be willing to fight, and you got to be willing to stand up and say no and use the leverage you have. We had in our hands, last point. We had in our hands, because of the caps, if we had passed this week a continuing resolution through the end of the year, we would have triggered the caps and we would have saved $100 billion. We would have cut a significant amount of money, upwards of, I think, $70 billion off of Nancy Pelosi's spending levels. And we would have left defense flat, veterans flat, and cut that $70 billion from non-defense. Instead, we plussed up defense $28 billion, left veterans roughly flat, and we funded the non-defense at her levels flat. Some will say we cut some stuff, but we really didn't.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Thank you, though, for everything that you're doing there, and we will do everything that we can to support you from our vantage point here in the grassroots. I've got other questions for you, but you know what? I'd rather go to the questions written in from folks in the audience. WC wrote in actually before the program started and wanted to ask that he saw news yesterday you had filed the Libel Act. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what that piece of legislation seeks to accomplish?
Yeah, I filed a bill yesterday along with 17 or 18 colleagues. I didn't see the final number, whereby we would remove the PrEP Act kind of protections that are in place for pharmaceutical manufacturers, specifically related to the COVID vaccines. Now, we're looking at broader applications of those things. And what that means is there are liability protections in place that say you cannot go to court and sue vaccine manufacturers, like broadly. Now, most of those have conditions in which you go through the normal FDA process and certain things, and then you end up they put you into a special fund, compensation fund if you're wrong. Let's say it's the polio vaccine, a vaccine that's been around for a long time, or some other vaccine that's been around for a while, measles or something. And let's say you get adverse reaction and they knew or should have known or whatever, there's some standard. You can go to this compensation fund, and if you were harmed, you can get, made whole or at least compensated. But if it's an emergency use, as was COVID, where you're not going through the normal FDA processes, well, then you end up in a different compensation fund that is not nearly as robust and it's not paid for. So we have this fund sitting there basically unfunded. And of roughly, 700,000 doses of COVID vaccines that are given, there have been 11 claims made in this compensation fund. That's outrageous. So for me, I decided, look, we can talk about amending that fund, and that's probably where it all ends up. But I wanted to make a case and say, look, let's just remove the liability protection. This isn't big boys. You guys want to make billions of dollars off the back of these COVID vaccines that were mandated, that were, pitched as this second coming of everything awesome from, Anthony Fauci and, Birx and all the others, the NIH and CDC, and with all due respect, former President Trump, and they're putting out all these vaccines. Like, no, sorry, count me out. So I think we ought to increase the liability for these companies and go back to the pre-protection route. And that's what we try to do with the Libel Act. We'll look at some other avenues for broader applications for vaccines, but this one was important to focus on the COVID vaccines.
Absolutely. Seems like a really important piece of legislation that we'll definitely be watching. Biff wrote in and he said, would it really be that hard to simply go back to February 2020 spending levels?
So, great question. All last year, when we were pushing the Limit, Save, Grow bill, okay, and I've got numbers on my whiteboard I can show you up here, but they're complicated, kind of messy, but that are still there from when I wrote them up like a year ago, that like one part of the board, which is 1471 is what we ended up with as the spending level to sort of bring it down from what CBO had scored at 1602 or something. That would have brought it back to pre-COVID levels, somewhere in the 2019, 2020 levels, depending on which account you're looking at. And we thought that was a fair number. It's like, guys, let's just go back to that in terms of spending. And if you do that, and you do that over 10 years and allow for some moderate, very low growth, and you grow your economy more than that, you can get back to balance, right? You got to go deal with mandatory. You got to go deal with Social Security and Medicare and all that. But if we just hold discretionary in check, then maybe we could at least start the process. It's a step, a baby step. And that was the agreement we cut with Kevin. And again, to his credit, he did a lot of this stuff working up to that. But when they cut the deal, they cut a deal with side deals. So what did that mean? It meant that when we put caps in place, which were at 1590, which was higher than the 2020 levels, they baked in some cuts so they could say they could get it to 1471, but that's not even the real deal. They had side deals that plussed up that spending up to a higher spending level. So what does all this mean? It means that they would continue to fund the bureaucracy. Part of our goal was to save money, but part of it was to cut the bureaucracy. I want to stop funding more of these bureaucrats that are going after the American people. I don't want more bureaucrats at the EPA. I don't want bureaucrats at HHS. I don't want more bureaucrats at the IRS, all that. So we just didn't get there. Now, full disclosure, even though it's not a good bill, even though I oppose it, mad about it, spoke about it, voted against it, at least we held non-defense flat. And we did that by stealing money out of COVID accounts that were still lingering. There weren't that many, but we got like 20 billion. And we cut that IRS expansion by about a quarter. So that $80 billion IRS expansion, we cut it to like 60-ish. Stole that money, pulled it over here, used it to plus up the bureaucrats over the non-defense. Now, Speaker Roy would have been fighting for, we're going to adhere to the caps, we're going to save that money, and then we're going to take this COVID money and this IRS money, and if there's going to be any money spent for Israel or Ukraine with border security, any of that, use it to offset those. But, I lost those arguments, so here we are. So to answer your question, that was a long-winded politician way of saying, well, some of us wanted to, some of us voted for it. We got Republicans to vote for it last year and Limit, Save, Grow, big accomplishment. But unfortunately, the deal that was cut today. And by the way, let me just give you a data point here. My friend Daniel Horowitz, you guys might know Daniel, with the Blaze.
He's an endorser of Commissioner States.
Yeah, huge, big fan. And he's been down there with Rick Green and down at the campus down in Fredericksburg. Well, Daniel tweeted out, let's see if I can find it here. I got to find it in a minute so I can get the exact data point. But basically that yesterday we had these, elections, right? With the primary elections. Obviously, Texas got a little spicy. Well,
I would expect nothing less from Texas.
Yeah, Daniel tweeted out, and this is really important. 31 of the 44 House GOP incumbents, that were reelected last night, voted for the biggest sellout of all time, this bill. 11 in Texas, 9 in California, 4 in Arkansas, 4 in North Carolina, 3 in Alabama. So you had 44 House GOP incumbents who were renominated last night through their primary. 31 of those 44, I wasn't one of them, I was one of the 13, voted for a bill that spends more money than Nancy Pelosi's spending levels and doesn't get the vast majority of our policy priorities. That just tells you something.
Absolutely. We've got a ton of great questions, but I know we're short on time, and I feel like it would be malpractice on my part if I didn't ask you about what's going on at the border. And I know that has been a big issue for you. You've been laser focused on it. Again, I'll ask the same question that I asked before. Is there more that we, the people, can be doing? And I know we had how many more rally there in Texas last year that you were a part of? And, obviously trying to get the Texas legislature to pass some important legislation, which they did. But is there more that we can be doing to do our part to stop what's happening at our southern border?
Well, it's a great question. This is another thing that I could take a whole hour on. What I'll just tell you is however bad you think the border is, it's worse. Here are a couple of, I think, things that people need to remember. All of this is being done purposefully. And if you look at, for example, you've got, what's his name, Mark Elias, who's out there, big Democrat lawyer, who's suing to stop Arizona from requiring that only citizens be able to register to vote. You've got Democrat Congress members that are saying they want people who are here legally to come to their districts. We all know what's going on. The numbers are astounding. It's all purposeful. and Americans are dying. Laken Riley, obviously the story, the young woman who got killed in Georgia. There's countless other examples that I can go through. You guys all know that because you guys follow all this. I think what we need to understand is the why here. And I think a number that will surprise you if you don't know this, unless you've heard me say it, 50 million, 50 million of our American population are foreign born. That puts it at roughly 16-ish%, and it depends if you round up a little bit, 16 or 17%, it's like 50 something million. They all have about 20 to 25 million kids. That puts that number well up into the 20% of the overall population. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, because that's the highest level we've ever had. It's higher than the late 19th century. Whether you're talking about the Asian community, from China, or you talk about the German, Polish, Irish, whatever, in the late 1800s, right? We had all this migration. It all dropped off, and it was kind of at its lowest point in the 1960s, 70s, right? In terms of percentage foreign born. And since the 60s, early 70s, it's been doing this, and then just accelerating. So now we have a massive percentage at a moment where we're not teaching our children that America's great. We're not teaching our children that God exists. We're not teaching our children the values of the Constitution or Western civilization. There are exceptions. Most of the people on this, screen here, everybody on this are, probably more inclined to teach their children that, or go to classical school or homeschool. But the vast majority of Americans aren't doing that. Here's another startling statistic that's related. In 2007, 17% of Americans checked the box unchurched. Today, 28% check that box. You do the math. 28% is now the biggest category. Bigger than evangelicals, bigger than Catholics. Then add in other groups, Jewish and other groups, other sects. So my point of all of that is just to say, to the point about border security and immigration, it's purposeful by Democrats. They're flooding the zone, overwhelming the system. They don't believe that people will be removed ultimately. They believe ultimately they'll be able to get them to be voters. And once and for all, they can kind of wipe the slate away from the core values that this country was founded upon. And I think that's what everybody needs to know. How bad do you think it is? It's worse. Yes, we impeached Alejandro Mayorkas. Great. I was the first to call for it in this July of 2021. We did it. We sent it to the Senate. They'll do a trial. He'll not get convicted, probably, almost surely. We passed HR 2, awesome bill. But guess what? We're going to fund next week the DHS approach, everything we're doing right now. We're not going to enforce border security, right? So we're living in a world right now where people are getting paroled in mass into the United States. You're endangered. So the last point, yes, what can you do? Keep doing what you're doing. Raise hell with your members of Congress. Raise hell. Pick these 31 of those 44. Look them up. If you were in a state that had a primary last night and your member was elected, and then they turned around today and voted for this garbage, let them know it's a problem. And the final point is, in Texas, God bless, keep pushing on it, right? We did pass a bill in the last legislative session. Next year, we need to toughen it. We need to give the governor even more tools. I think Governor Abbott has really accelerated into that space. We could go further in terms of what we're doing in removals and everything else. But, it's accelerated, done a great job in terms of at least forcing the question. And now you got more numbers going to California and Arizona. Numbers in Texas have gone down, and they're going out to Arizona and California. So keep the pressure up at the state level, at the federal level, and let people know that you demand change.
Congressman Roy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. I know that you in particular take slings and arrows, right, left, center. It doesn't matter where they are on the political spectrum. They seem to throw arrows at you. And to me, that just tells me that you're over the target, sir. And in my opinion, from my vantage point, you're one of the top leaders in our nation. So I just thank you for everything that you're doing. And we appreciate very much your support of Convention of States.
Well, I appreciate you all. Let me finish with this real quick. Just say thank you. We need you guys. Seriously, it's a pressure and it's a push. We're going to keep fighting. I'm not going to back off. I'm going to call it like I see it. Many of you might go, well, why did you go out and support Ron DeSantis? It's like, because he's a good friend, and the guy's been kicking butt in Florida, and I love the guy. I'm fully, supporting President Trump, and we'll back him. It's a primary. But here's one thing I want to tell you. So you guys did that video. They may not be on. They're probably not on right now. But the video those guys did from Independence Hall. So in 2020, when all the crap was going on with COVID, you remember that was the summer when there was riots, all the crap, and the statues are getting toppled. I went to Independence Hall with my staff one day. I was just mad because all the crap going on and they're burning stuff and statues and all that. We got a car here in DC. We had finished voting on Thursday. We got up early Friday morning. We drove to Philadelphia, went to Independence Hall, and I recorded a video out there, talking about how great this place is, not because of the bricks and mortar, but because of what they did and what it stands for, that we need to stand up for these things. I went to Fort McHenry. I came back to DC, went to a bunch of spots around town, monuments, memorials, Jefferson, everything else. Recorded all these videos. Well, here's the best part. We went to Independence Hall. It was July 2nd, and it was closed because it was COVID, but as a member of Congress, they let us go in. So it was my 3 staff and I, and we were able to go into Independence Hall on July 2nd, which you guys will all recognize is the date, right? Because while July 4th was when we adopted the Declaration, July 2nd is when we actually voted to separate from Britain. So to be in there just by ourselves on July 2nd, that was pretty extraordinary to be there in 2020.
That's amazing. Thank you, sir. And again, sir, God bless you. We really appreciate everything that you're standing for, and keep up the good fight, brother.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all very much.
Thank you, sir. All right, folks. And again, to me, what that conversation really underscores is the reason for what we're trying to accomplish with Convention of States. Congressman Roy is doing everything he can. We try to send as many of our representatives there to do that and to stand for the truth and to stand courageously and fight back. But we know ultimately Congress will not solve the problems. We, the people, are the solution, and we have to do that. So if you're interested, go on over to conventionofstates.com, sign up and become an activist today. Click on that Take Action button, and or go to conventionofstates.com/act and become a volunteer. Okay, so one of the key purposes of Convention of States at Home is that we want to inspire you and our audience to become activists, to become engaged. As I just mentioned, I encourage you to go over to our website, but we want to show you some ways that you can do this even from the comfort of your own home, right? Because we know that everybody's got a lot of time management challenges in their lives, and you don't have a lot of time to give to us. Well, we want to do our best to show you small, simple ways that you can make an impact. And so that's what we're going to do during this next segment tonight. We're going to show you one of our most important tools for activism with Convention of States. It's something that we call Telepatriot. And for this demonstration, I'm going to be turning it over to our senior field correspondent, none other than Jonathan Viot. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. One of the best ways that any supporter can make meaningful contributions to the COS movement from the comfort of their own home is by signing up to become a member of the Convention of States phone team, otherwise known as a Telepatriot volunteer. Telepatriot is a phone calling feature, a part of the COS Action app that was designed by a grassroots activist. The purpose of Telepatriot was to make phone calling more accessible and easier for our supporters. We have used Telepatriot when making phone calls to contact supporters to contact their legislators to advance the COS resolution or other important bills. We also contact supporters to let them know about meetings and other events in the area. And we also use it as a function to get people out to vote in important elections as well. So the best way for anyone to get involved or to make those types of contributions is to go ahead and sign up to become a Telepatriot volunteer. The way to start by becoming a member of the phone team is by going to conventionofstates.com/phone team. Here you will see instructions on how to get involved and join either our calling team, our texting team, or to review stats that we post on a monthly basis. However, the very first thing that you'll want to do when signing up to become a volunteer or to become a Telepatriot volunteer is by becoming a volunteer activist. You would click on this link, it would bring you to the volunteer activist application. And in here, you will fill out some additional information, your contact information, answering a survey, which question number 2 asks if you're comfortable talking over the phone. You'll want to say yes. And then down here in the comments section, you'll also want to indicate that you are interested in becoming a Telepatriot volunteer. You'll submit the application, and then your state team will contact you and walk you through some additional steps from there. But how simple and how easy is this app to use? Well, I'm so glad that you asked, because we will give you a brief demonstration. I'm using my Android device. It's a little bit different on the iPhone, but this is how things would work. So you would sign into the COS Action app, and then on the bottom of your screen, if you're using an iPhone, you'll see some additional icons. One would say Telepatriot after you've been assigned a Telepatriot volunteer. For Android users, in the upper left-hand corner, you tap the little hamburger icon, if you will, and then you would select Telepatriot, and that will bring you here to the screen. You will then see any of the teams that you are assigned to. As you can see, I've been assigned to a couple of teams here. And then you will click on the team with the active mission. That will then bring up the script for the Telepatriot mission that you can tap on and see the entire script there. And then you can go ahead and tap on the mobile function there to make the phone call to that person. And you have their name and contact information in there. And so you would tap on mobile, that would place the phone call. I'm not going to call our dear friend Joyce there, but that's what would happen. And then it will bring you back to the app, and you will be able to fill out additional information as to how the call went. So you could say spoke on the phone, and then include some important notes. And this is important and effective and useful for our activists, so that this way they can contact and know exactly how these communications went with the people that are a part of the mission, and we can then follow up if necessary. After you enter the notes, you can then hit the check mark in the upper right-hand corner, and it will bring you back to the mission and move you to the next person on the list. Again, you can tap down and see the entire script there in front of you. You can also share the script with you to another device. So in case you didn't want to flip back and forth between your phone calling function and you prefer to just send it to yourself and have it perhaps up on your computer or something like that, you can do that by using the share function. There are many other things about Telepatriot that we could go into, including how you could send follow-up text messages and emails. But that will be for another day. This is just a brief tutorial to show you how simple and easy it is to operate the Telepatriot tool. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, one of the best ways that you can make a huge contribution to the Convention of States movement is by becoming a Telepatriot volunteer. So we encourage you to go to conventionofstates.com/phone team to sign up today. Reporting live from the Viaud residence, this is Jonathan Viaud for COS at Home.
Just tremendous reporting there from our senior field correspondent. He should be up for some type of award. All right, enough of that. Now let's go ahead and go to the mailbag section of the program, and I'm really excited to finally be able to debut this. But before we go and answer exactly the question that was submitted to us, I wanted to bring you back to something that I mentioned last time. We needed to come up with a way to name this, right? Now, COS at Home gives us the chance to participate in one of our favorite activities, right? Which is interacting with you, our audience, and our tremendous grassroots army of volunteers who are wholly committed to true political change through an Article 5 convention, right? You wouldn't be here otherwise, and so we're so grateful for you. And that's why we want you to participate in the naming of this segment of the program when we answer your questions. So what we'd like for you to do is we'd like for you to go on over to conventionofstates.com/mailbag to complete a survey and put a creative label on this segment, okay? So now we're taking submissions only for the next week, okay? So we've got 1 week going. Again, conventionofstates.com/mailbag to submit your name. And after a week, we're then going to take a look at those results, and we will name the winner on April's COS at Home program. Okay, so please go on over there, send us your best shot for a name, and we're going to select it and we'll announce it on the next program. And we hope that you enjoy participating in this fun contest to make COS at Home even more enjoyable for your viewing pleasure. Okay, so now let's go ahead to the first question. I feel like we need a drum roll here. I should have told you that, Producer G. We needed a drum roll kind of to go on to the first question. And it was written in by Eva Jones. And Eva said, I keep hearing people asking, what can I do to fight to save our country? So what can citizens do, especially if one lives in a blue state like Massachusetts? And I think that this is the perfect question for us to answer right out of the gate, because it really gets at the heart of what we're trying to accomplish as activists. And personally, it's an important question for me because although I now live in the free state of Florida, I grew up and lived up until only a few years ago in New Jersey. So this is important to me because I now have an opportunity to share with you a little bit about my story with Convention of States and what we were able to accomplish there. But it's important to emphasize first that it's not impossible to accomplish our goals in a blue state, right? We don't have to look any further than Massachusetts, who just recently passed the COS resolution through committee there. Okay, we had a committee hearing, and now we've actually passed through the House committee. This is the second time we've done this. We did this in 2022. We've done it again in 2024. We're making progress there. So hats off to our Massachusetts team. Just today, our dear friends out in Hawaii just filed the resolution there with 4 Democrat sponsors and 3 Republican sponsors. So we are making some incredible progress, and we can't also forget, we look back at our success in history. And Alabama, when we passed our resolution there, we had 22 Democrats in the House vote in favor of our resolution. This is not unheard of, right? So we can message this to blue states. We can message this to Democrats. There are some of them that do believe in restraining our government and bringing the powers back to we the people. We just have to make sure that we're willing to put in the hard work. And that's exactly what I want. The next aspect of this that I want to address with you is that we have a saying with Convention of States that any solution or the solution to any problem that we have is more grassroots, right? It is so incredibly important that we keep that in mind, and we always focus on building relationships first and foremost amongst our grassroots army, building up the army, educating more people. I talked about it earlier with Congressman Chip Roy. We want to get to convention. We want to have those amendments added to our Constitution, but at the end of the day, the amendments won't save us. As I mentioned on our last program, you and I, we the people, we're the solution. So we talk about it. We need to be building relationships out there amongst our community, educating people, and then ultimately activating them, right? Reach, teach, activate. That's what we need to do. And that's one of the best things that you can do in a blue state, because Mark Meckler has said this before, somebody who originally came from California, and now he lives in Texas. But there were more people that were active and fired up in California because they felt like there was no actual outlet for them to accomplish the things that they wanted to accomplish, right? Deep blue state California, just like myself from deep blue New Jersey. What's the outlet? What can we do to really try to solve the issues? Well, this Convention of States gives people an avenue to do that, right? Other groups, they call themselves think tanks. We're a do tank. We have the opportunity to really build people and strengthen them and give them something tangible to accomplish. So that's some of the things that you want to do, but you can't disregard the left blue leaning legislators, right? Democrat legislators. You need to make sure that you're building relationships with them too. You know, we emphasize relationships. So that's something that you can accomplish in a blue state. And again, I mentioned I came from New Jersey, and when I became the state director, one of the things that we were not doing correctly prior to that was we were not dedicated and investing in building that grassroots army. So when I became the state director there, we kind of switched the script. We focused on building relationships. We focused on hearing a little bit of noise. Speaking of relationships, we focused on having meetings and just making sure that we had somewhere for people to show up and talk about Convention of States or talk about what they're frustrated about. And in blue states, I'm sure they've got a lot of things. Hey, not for nothing, red states have a lot of things that they're frustrated about as well. But if you give people an opportunity to go somewhere and to express their frustrations, they're going to then feel like they're part of a community and a group, and they're going to want to do more. And the best thing is you can tell them that we have the solution to the problems that they're experiencing, to the frustrations that they have. And they're going to love to hear that. You're going to be able to give them hope. So in New Jersey, we focused on having those meetings and building up the grassroots army. And I'm really proud to say that some of the best accomplishments in New Jersey came after I left, because it just went to show you how incredible the grassroots army that we had there in New Jersey and what they've been able to accomplish. And what I mean by that is when I first got started, we had one in-person meeting that took place regionally across the state of New Jersey every month. Just one. We eventually got it up to 4. COVID happened and kind of put us behind. We weren't able to meet with everyone. Well, I'm proud to say that the New Jersey team now has 9 in-person meetings every month. That's a testament to how committed they are, even in a deep blue state, to trying to save our country and build up that grassroots army. So a tip of the cap to the New Jersey team. Another thing that they've done, again, after I left, was that they were able to get a Democrat to come on and be a sponsor of our resolution there. It can happen. It can get done. You just have to be willing to put in the hard work and spend time to build relationships and grow the grassroots army and meet with legislators, even the ones that are on the opposite side of the aisle than most of us, to try and build those relationships. And the last thing I'll mention is something that Rita mentioned earlier, which is our 34 ready legislation, or our model commissioner legislation packages that we've recently released. We can focus on trying to get what a state can do when we get to convention, even if that state doesn't ultimately pass our resolution. That's not to say you should give up on our resolution. Absolutely not. I just expressed to you ways that we're making major progress in some of these states. But if you're running into issues there and you want to try to start with a different approach and really building relationships with the legislators, take a look at our 34 ready legislation, our model commissioner resolutions, and try to say, look, you may not agree with what we're trying to accomplish and why we're going to call a convention. The convention's likely going to happen anyway. We need to be prepared and work with legislators that way. So there are tons of great things. And again, Eva, thank you so much for that excellent question. I wish we had more time. I'd spend even more time kind of explaining more that we accomplished in our blue states. But I think that's a great snapshot and a great way for you to get started. Speaking of the successes that we have had as a movement in Convention of States, I could not let the day go by without acknowledging one of the most important things on our calendar. And that is on March 6th, 2014, Georgia became the very first state to pass the Convention of States resolution. So a very happy 10th anniversary to our activists and supporters in the Peach State. Alaska and Florida will also be celebrating their 10th anniversaries this year. They were just on the heels of Georgia, but Georgia's day is today, and so we wanted to celebrate them. And we have a short newsreel of what things were like back 10 years ago when we passed this resolution.
The Peach State is making history. Lawmakers passed a preliminary measure today that puts pressure on Washington to get its act together. The resolution calls for a convention of states. That's where leaders can actually change the U.S. Constitution. 41 NBC's Amanda Castro joins us from the Capitol with more from today's hearing.
It's just the first of many hurdles for Senate Resolution 736. Basically, state lawmakers believe Washington is too big, too powerful, and spends too much money. And they're hoping this resolution gives the power back to the states. 15-year-old Amelia Boland is concerned about the country's future.
Right now, it's like we're on iron rails, and unless we do something, then we're going down path.
That's why she and her family drove up to the Gold Dome from Macon to join dozens of other people from across the state who support Senate Resolution 736. State Senator Cecil Staton filed it last week. It calls for a convention of states under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution.
People are concerned about the federal government, runaway expenses, a bloated government and bureaucracy, too many federal regulations.
Here's the breakdown. 34 states must pass similar resolutions. A convention of states would be called, where delegates can propose amendments to the Constitution. Then those amendments would have to be passed by 3/4 of the state legislatures to become part of the Constitution.
So it's a long process, but this is the method the Constitution gives the states to try to rein in the federal government.
The director of the Convention of States project says Georgia is on its way to becoming the first state to ever consider it.
It was intended for the purpose of when the federal government was out of control. Today's the day that the founders intended for us to use this very process.
But not everyone at the hearing was for the resolution.
Let's do some amending of the Constitution, but let's do it the safe way, which is the way it's always been, and we've done it 27 times without calling a convention.
All in favor, raise your right hand.
The Senate Rules Committee voted in favor of Staten's resolution. Supporters say this will keep the ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness alive for generations to come.
It gives me a future and it gives me a hope to hold on to, and I know that if the Convention of the States goes through, that our country isn't completely gone.
Senator Staten says this resolution will go before the Senate. If passed there, it'll move to the House of Representatives. And we'll be sure to follow this story, but for now, reporting in Atlanta, Amanda Castro, 41 NBC News.
And a few more facts about this resolution. Senator Staten says 20 states are in the process of passing similar ones, but it could take years for anything to happen. There has never been a convention of states called under Article 5 of the Constitution in U.S. history.
And so that is that, right? And we know how it all ended there in the great state of Georgia. And I just, as a regional director, I have the privilege and the honor to work with that team. And I just wanted to personally say happy anniversary, Georgia team. Tony, Joelle, all of the amazing members of the team there. Thank you for everything that you continue to do. God bless you, and let's keep on fighting. And so, folks, that brings us to the conclusion of another COS at Home. Just a reminder, though, all of our COS at home shows are going to be airing live on the first Wednesday of every month at 8 o'clock Eastern. I promise we'll do our best to keep them to an hour in the future. I know we ran a little overtime tonight, and thank you for sticking with us. Unfortunately, we cannot announce the next guest for April's COS at Home. We're close. We're hopefully going to be finalizing that and releasing it soon. But nevertheless, we're going to be here Wednesday, April 3rd, 8 o'clock Eastern time, and we hope that you'll join us. So, ladies and gentlemen, as always, I just want to say that this has been a lot of fun. I hope that you enjoyed the program. Thank you for everything that you do. In just a few minutes, as we close, we're going to debut this week's COS Now, so that this way you can see even more of the progress that we've been making with Convention of States. But first, I want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you again to Congressman Chip Roy for joining us tonight. Big thanks to the legend, Producer G, who is always doing amazing things behind the scenes. It's not easy putting all of this together, and let alone making me look at least somewhat presentable. But Producer G does amazing work behind the scenes, and I'm grateful for him. But of course, the greatest thanks goes to all of you in our audience, in the grassroots, everything that you continue to do on a day in and day out basis. We're so grateful for all of you and everything that you do for the Convention of States Article 5 movement. It's important to remember that despite all of the problems we currently face as a country, you and I, we the people, remain the solution. So let's take action to reclaim liberty and save our nation. Thank you so much. God bless you, and have a great night.
Lurking behind the full frontal assault by Donald Trump and his enablers lies a far more far-reaching threat.
Corporate media's campaign against the Convention of States movement continues. A recent segment of Joy Reid's show on MSNBC featured attacks on Convention of States.
We are talking about an incredibly radical vision of America. But this time it would be made permanent by a nuclear option that exists in the Constitution's Article 5. They have come together to push for this constitutional convention. They've been pushing it out to the states since 2013. The leader of this effort, a man named Mark Meckler, formerly head of Tea Party Patriots, now head of the Convention of States efforts, has said that they seek to roll back 115 years of progressivism.
What's more dangerous, hypothetical nightmares about a citizen-led movement to enact a constitutional solution, or the decades of very real consequences of a corrupt and incompetent Congress? The Convention of States Florida team released a new video featuring everyday citizens who answered that very question.
Departments within the executive branch, within other branches of government, that we had no say. And those are the ones that are dictating your life.
We need to call a Convention of States. And according to Article 5 of the Constitution, that's just what we have a right to do.
And the feds don't want you to know that because they have all the power right now. If you want to have a purpose, if you want to save your country, if you don't want to say there's nothing I can do and then just give up, then be active. Action is the best thing you can do.
On Wednesday last week, Convention of States hosted a live discussion exposing the Biden administration's 30 by 30 land grab plot.
So what the Biden administration has done is they have taken every administrative agency and retooled them in order to achieve this agenda.
It does not negate the fact that we need a Convention of States. We absolutely do. because the only way you're going to stop this coveting is to make the National Park Service and the Department of Interior roll back into their constitutional boundaries, I guess you could say.
You can watch the full hour of that broadcast at conventionofstates.com/30x30. Florida governor and official endorser of Convention of States action, Ron DeSantis, is continuing to raise awareness about the Article 5 convention solution.
The people in the states have the ability to propose changes to discipline Washington. The founding fathers structured the Constitution like that for a reason.
Tell your state legislators that you want to see this, because we the people have the ability to change this country for the better.
Convention of States has 5.5 million volunteers, and many of them are in this audience. And I thank them over and over and over again for what they're trying to do. They are engaged, they are citizens, they don't get paid. It's an amazing movement.
Quick recap of Convention of States progress in 2024. COS citizen activists have scheduled to host Capitol events in 28 state legislatures. We have already secured at least 299 legislative sponsors to file and champion the COS resolution in their respective state legislatures. In addition to the 19 states which have already joined the movement, the COS resolution has been introduced in 18 states. The COS resolution is currently pending or already voted on in 23 legislative committees. So far, we've had successful committee votes in Iowa, Massachusetts, and Idaho. As we await action from the Idaho Senate on Convention of States, local media continued its coverage.
Convention of States Action Group says the amendments they're looking to propose would, quote, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit its power and jurisdiction, and impose term limits on its officials and members of Congress.
It is interesting, though, Senator Leahy said in committee that he went to Virginia, actually, over the summer, where they had a simulation, state conventions like this. So he said it worked very well.
Meanwhile, the COS Florida team held a rally at the State House in celebration of the 10th anniversary of their passage of the COS Action Resolution. 34 Ready legislation was introduced in the Kentucky legislature, while the COS Action Article 5 application sets the agenda for the convention. 34 Ready is COS Action's model legislation for preparing for the Article 5 convention, including how the legislature will select commissioners, as well as the processes for instructing, governing, and recalling commissioners. The South Carolina team gained 13 additional co-sponsors for our 34 Ready legislation. Additionally, the South Carolina Senate Medical Affairs Subcommittee favorably passed the COS-backed House Bill 4624, which would ban gender transition procedures for minors. The Parental Rights Bill successfully passed the Wisconsin legislature. Our team is now asking the governor to sign it. Two of our state teams helped pass important legislation through their state houses this week: West Virginia's Parental Rights Bill, HB 4313, and one of Georgia's election integrity bills, HB 974. Our Georgia team sent over 450 messages to their Georgia state reps. The COS Tennessee team helped our allies at Alliance for Defending Freedom achieve passage of parental rights legislation through committee this week by a 6-2 vote. And finally, here's some snapshots from COS events going on around the country, including Oregon, Hawaii, Illinois, and New Jersey. And now, you're up to date with Convention of States.